Alex, would you like to introduce yourself?
Andy, thank you very much. Pleasure to be part of the Dublin conversations. Alex Aiken, Executive Director, Government Communication, and I cover the Cabinet Office, Union Security and International Communications for the UK Government.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to take what we call the 5 steps to the Dublin window. The context is that we're in an era where there's been profound disruptive change, which has led to both a paradox of greater convergence, but also greater fragmentation. And that we've got immense new knowledge from behavioural sciences, anthropology, digital technology, and so on. And there's potential to rethink established ideas like advertising, journalism, marketing, public relations, and more, and to either repurpose them or replace them with better ideas. And we can co-create ideas to create a better framework of thinking to enable the communications industry to rise to the challenge of tackling society's wider issues of growing distrust, divisive tribalism, and not being able to come together to tackle the big challenges. So we're looking at a process where we could maybe unlearn some of our existing thinking to grow new ideas and to explore. So we're taking the 5 steps to what we call the Dublin window. And step 1 is about the need, a second here.
Yep.
Step 1 is about recognizing that a lot of existing definitions, such as like public relations or advertising, can be likened to like the early astronomers who created very complex maps of their world, but with a fundamental flaw that they put like the Earth at the center, rather than it being part of a bigger constellation. And so really with the insights from, as I say, new behavioral science and so on, we're suggesting that actually that we can create a universe where at the heart of the universe is this concept of authentic purpose. And authentic purpose can be a business purpose. I want to make money, a creative purpose. I want to do something because it's got meaning to me, or a social purpose where you need to connect with others to achieve your wider goals. And at the heart of this process is that you need to create confidence in your authentic purpose to coexist, cooperate, or collaborate. And confidence is based on your own consciousness that what you perceive as reality is valid, confidence in who you are, your purpose and purposefulness, confidence in others, and others have confidence in you, and a mood, what we call a zeitgeist confidence, that creates like business success and failure and so on. And we recognize actually confidence in the communications in it is a critical known unknown that, you know, it's there, but we need to find more about it. And by having a sort of coherent and compelling purpose and purposefulness, makes it easier to create confidence. Just any thoughts on this observation, these ideas here, Alex?
Yeah, I think it is within all of us, and I hope that the UK communications industry can rise to the challenge that you set. And I think in many areas, when I look at award winners for the competitions that we have and some of the great work that's been done that reflects that authentic purpose, I think that is evident across the United Kingdom, and we are one of the world's leading centres for the ancient and modern practice of communication. I can identify with the issues that you talked about because being in public service communication, the scrutiny that is applied to that on a daily and hourly basis means you are consistently reviewing your purpose and your progress. And clearly the purpose of the communication that I'm responsible for is to improve the lives of our fellow citizens. So to give you a practical example, I remember on the 28th of February 2020 being called into a series of meetings that afternoon about how we deal with COVID and what the communication contribution to this emerging pandemic. You know, we weren't really at that stage entirely clear what we were facing, but we had very good medical and scientific advice. We had policy people, we had a certain amount of experience, we could see what was happening on television screens in places like Italy. So what was the communication response? And certainly in public service communication, you are always aware that you can't attack a problem of that scale or a smaller scale with just PR or marketing or any siloed approach. And we learned through campaigns we've run over the years, but it was certainly true of the pandemic, that you have to bring the insight into the room, and the polling and focus group, the public research. You have to bring the behavioural experts, you have to bring the digital communicators and PR and marketing, and all work together. So probably it's easier for us, Andy, in the sense of the work that we do and the campaigns that ultimately are there to enable people to make more of their lives by living longer lives, by fighting obesity, by becoming a teacher, or working in the armed services, the recruitment campaigns we run. And they are generally full spectrum campaigns. They involve all the techniques that are available to modern communicators.
It's interesting you make the comment there about like modern PR and like the full spectrum now. Is there a need to go beyond a traditional model in our work of messaging, and even like the sort of the full spectrum of communications, and go beyond where we are looking at issues of like the purpose, social cohesion, and so on? So, do you think there's a potential need for a bigger framework of thinking, armed with the new insights we've got from like behavioural science and so on?
Well, I mean, messaging should create influence, and from that effect, in case of the work that I deliver, behaviour change for public good. I would be wary of ascribing to all organisations a specific social good that they should be delivering. Of course, their work must deliver within the legal framework. It should deliver to a social purpose. But in a free society, organisations need to make their choices.
Yeah, so, and those choices again can be weighted and balanced against their sort of underlying purpose of what their role is and why they're there, sort of thing.
That is right. I think that's spot on. But they have to come to those their choices, and in the context of in the private sector, how they operate, and they will be judged by their customers, and they'll be held to account by their shareholders.
Yeah. So moving on to a second stage then, that having identified that you have an authentic purpose, and how do you then connect with others? And we're influenced here by the work of people like Professor Daniel Kahneman, and his Nobel Prize winning work in behavioural psychology. And from this, that identified that firstly, we're emotionally driven animals, but then by identifying 5 key rules of thumb, or what are known as heuristics, these actually enable us to effectively socially interact. And the 5 heuristics we've identified, we believe actually frame any campaign. And by doing one or more, or synergy between these 5 dimensions, really can provide a map of how you socially interact. And the 5 heuristics, rules of thumb, are get known and noticed, which accords with much of my working life has been about building awareness. Well, now there's validity for that in that sense. Likability, and it's not just in Facebook likes, but a whole spectrum from effective liking through to respect, admiration, and even paradoxically liking to dislike. So figures like Piers Morgan, where people have an emotional connection, even albeit a negative one. And then also trust. And then front of mind, even though like, it may be known, people are lazy in their thought processes and will choose the easily available option. So in our work, one of our tasks will be to ensure we're front of mind at critical times. And fifthly, being talked about, the social proof that if we're unsure ourselves, we can be guided by the word on the street, what others are saying. So we believe these sort of 5 dimensions really frame any campaign. I just wonder if any thoughts there, Alex?
Yeah, I completely disagree, Andy. I mean, it's a good challenge, and I think it's worth absolutely worth considering the 5 dimensions. But I disagree, because I think my starting point would be the values that drive you. You know, what I'm here to do as a public service communicator is to deliver truth well told, to enable people to make good choices that will in turn improve their lives. Unless you have values, and I could reinforce the evidence of values through the civil service code, through the framework of law that we operate in, I don't think you have an anchor to deliver the attributes that you are talking about. Allied to that, I would prefer Aristotle's logos, ethos, pathos. Any argument needs to be logical, needs to be credible in terms of the ethos of the speaker, and has a degree of connection. The pathos that is part of any great case. And then there is something else I think is particularly important in a society that can sometimes be riven by partial debates or misinformation, disinformation, which is the sort of arguments that Karl Popper put, I think, back in the 1950s about the importance of evidence, objective truth, rigorous debate, and so on, which are the things that provide a frame with which you could interact. So I think that I would prefer the formulation that your five have inspired me to think about, rather than the way that, as I understand it, you've put the case.
Can I agree, but maybe challenge in the sense that step one of purpose would be envisaged at, and again, going back to Aristotle, so it embraces the idea of character. And so we'd actually provide a free training program of identifying your purpose and character. And so it could be suggested that those elements of who you are, your values, and what's important to you, and so on, that's identifying like the ship that's sailing the sea, and then the dimensions here. And mentioned about Aristotle. So with work recognizing that we're emotionally driven animals, and you mentioned one framework there, could it be that actually this provides a framework for evaluating facts, so that the issue might be that facts don't exist by themselves, but how you react to the facts, whether you like them, whether you trust them, and so on, or whether they're being talked about, could provide maybe a useful guide there for their judging their significance and value.
Andy, really interesting. So I accept your challenge in terms of your step one, the purpose, the anchor. It's interesting the way we work in government. You are continually driven back to the values and purpose in any case you make, to make the macro argument in a language that people understand. I would summarize that, but it's a good challenge, and that does explain the step two, the five rules. I think facts are sacred. I do not like the fact that I have to pay a tax bill, but I absolutely have to pay it, and it's an objective fact. So I would argue there is a body of facts which are exactly that, and give us the foundation for the decisions we subsequently make.
Just a minor point. So could that be then the fact that you've got to pay that tax bill, and then feeding back to your purpose that being a good upright citizen, sort of behaviour aligned with that, and so on. So can I say some interesting points out? Can I move on to step 3 of the model, which is that it's an evolution of what we're familiar with, the Peso model, but with some profound iterations and evolutions from. And that, so you've identified the purpose, who you are, your character. You're on a journey where you've got a potential map of you need to get known, like, trusted, front of mind, being mind, or what. And then these represent choices. So whereas the original Peso model was based on channels, these are strategic choices that you have, and significantly the own is not just own media, but actually your own behaviors, own reputation, even spending time with someone can be a way of earning trust. And so, as I say, there's much more dimensions to explore in your own, beyond just being an own channel. And then we've also introduced the dimension of nudge, again, so that in the choice architecture, making choices easier for people, you can influence others without necessarily communicating. So we're suggesting here that actually we've got a framework whereby it's a much bigger range, and again, with a map of you need to get known, like, trusted, front of mind, and you've then got the choice, these range of choices. Just any thoughts on this idea at all, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are roughly right, and they would mirror the sort of considerations that we would apply to any significant campaign. But I think there is the opportunity to build on this. So I think we agree with own, and I think you made a good points there, and paid for and earned. The nudge point, I mean, some of the brilliant people who advise on social marketing, the recent World Social Marketing Conference, nudge, shove, smack, hug as the 4 dimensions of social marketing. And you're going to use more nudge than you are smack. That would be for rule breakers. But nevertheless, seeing the wider context you can deploy in terms of social marketing. Shared, certainly, but I think there is something deeper than that, which is about the way that you use third parties, influencers, other messengers. I remember talking to an imam about this, and who said to me, in some societies, the messenger is more powerful than the message. And I think that's right. So I think there are further dimensions to your step 3.
Yeah, and again, feeding back to that original core of that purpose and the character, and really connecting with Aristotle's character. And then step 4 is then having the choices, really recognizing the significance of what's called emergence. So our reality in our world is shaped by what emerges from it. And this leads us to a path of more bottom-up rather than top-down communications. And a very simple but delightful model developed by Professor Gareth Loudon of Imperial College London, where of the listen, connect, do model. So really the creative task consists of listening, and listening in its broadest sense, with all senses, connecting this to new things, doing, and doing can be development of an idea to a tangible practical outcome, and it's a continual dynamic, and with at the heart purpose being like the engine driving, and it's in a context of like empathy and reflection now. And that we're in an industry that's witnessed emergent terms, such as, for example, comms, but without any formal definition. And so the Dublin Conversations recognises that first, there's perhaps a need for a label that describes a bigger world than we currently have in communications, behaviour change, and so on. Comms could be a potential candidate, and a suggested definition there of how you create confidence within yourself and with others to exist, coexist, cooperate, or collaborate by managing perceptions around your future behaviours. Which is fundamental to being purposeful. So at its heart is really about how do we build confidence around our purpose. And that there's also 2 other significant dimensions in that sociologists can now do experiments to establish like universal human laws, one of which is that 2 out of 3 people will help a stranger, which is good news, but also means that 1 out of 3 doesn't. And that's not the moral judgment then. And we believe that actually this provides us with sort of 2 prime driving instincts, which lead us to an idea of we-led thinking, where your instinct is to think of like the communal common good others first, and me-led, where it's of a self-interest first. So really this idea of emergence, we live in a world that emerges around us, and as individuals, as organizations, we listen, connect, do. And that there's a potential label of comms and these instincts of we-led and me-led. So I'm throwing a lot at you there, Alex. So any thoughts there, Torna?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, Andy. I mean, in a recent discussion on communications around the royal funeral, there was some concern about an article in one of the major newspapers that was mildly critical of things, and I made the point that newspaper article might be read by 100,000 people, but David Beckham had just reached 13 million views on his hugely uplifting journey through the queue on TikTok. And I said, look, we've got to see the communications world as it is now, multidimensional, online, video, visual content. And I make that point to illustrate the fact that communication is now bottom up, almost more than top down, and we have to try and go with the flow and understand what is being said and when and how we should intervene. I'm not a great fan of your label, comms. I mean, I think it is a good challenge. And I also think that people are we-led and me-led in different situations. I was in a big American city over the summer. I was slightly nervous. And if someone had come up to me then and asked for help, I would have shied away from them because I was nervous. If I go out onto Whitehall now and a tourist asks for directions, they often do, I would gladly help them because I feel safe in that environment. So I think that we adopt necessarily different personas in different circumstances, though I accept that some people will 2/3 of the time be more inclined to help you than not.
Yeah. So it's represents of polarities, instincts, as opposed to silos of set ways of thinking now. And then the last step is about it's an idea that developed from work of Professor Jim McNamara in Australia, where he identified a distrust-trust continuum. So, like from 0 to 10, 0 to 3, if you're disengaged, from 8 to 10 you're maybe over trusting, and then maybe vulnerable to being like naive and gullible, and we say actually it's stronger than that in the sense that it's also the area where you could be prejudiced, biased, that you only have one set worldview, and that there's a middle zone of what's called, like we've labeled the purposeful trust zone, that is essential for our society to function, that you need to have be open to understanding others in order to coexist, cooperate, or collaborate, and that really the idea of what are called regenerative comms, where you get sort of win-win outcomes, where you not only seek to influence and added value from your social interactions, but also replenish society's social fabric of purposeful trust, togetherness, and being open to understanding. Saying any thoughts there on that idea, Alex?
Well, we've talked about behavioural science, Andy, and like your work, I'm an admirer of Jim McNamara's. But trouble is, if you say it's Jim's, I think automatically, well, it must be good then. It does.
There's character coming through there.
Yeah. I think it makes great sense. I think if I apply that to the model of trust in British society, that purposeful trust zone makes a lot of sense. I mean, in terms of products, some of the great tech companies are possibly in the over trusted thing, and people just think they're good because they've got a great brand and so on. The purposeful trust zone, a lot of our banks, a lot of our energy companies, government as a whole for its brand tends to be in that sort of what I call the 60 to 70% quadrant, as public services as a force for good. And we know the reputations of energy companies and government can change considerably. But I think I would use that regenerative comms, exactly as the title suggests, to try and bring people who are less engaged with societies, I hope the government is trying to do with its levelling up agenda, into the engaged to make the most of their skills. So that makes a great deal of trust, great deal of sense to me.
Yeah, I think so. So really to sort of see how they all fit together, this idea of step one of purpose, where your character based on your beliefs, values, persona, social instincts and so on, you then need to socially interact. There's a potential framework there with the 5 goals. You've then got 5 choices of how you interact, and the model there of like listening, connect, doing, and really outstanding performance as a social citizen, as I say, the idea of this regenerative comms. So really, I mean, we've done a sort of 5-step journey there. And we've got this question of what does better look like for our industry. Has this been an interesting conversation, one where maybe you feel more confident about addressing what that looks like, or less confident?
I mean, the first thing I say is well done to you and your colleagues for having these discussions, because unless we continue to learn and continue to question how and why we do things, we won't succeed. I think this is a really useful tool for thinking through how we act and how we deliver the things that we're responsible for. I'm with you on step 1 about purpose, and step 3 about the choices and channels, and step 5 about building trust. I'm a little more sceptical on 2 and 4, but again, it is a useful tool. And I think the conclusion I would bring is that, you know, people tend to focus very strongly in their professional development on how to be a better campaigner, a better digital performer, understanding behavioral science, but actually understanding how and why we do things, and the leadership that we bring to projects, as this conversation has shown, is equally, if not more important.
Yeah, and then going forward, I mean, the Dublin conversations over the next year, looking to have 231 of these conversations. Is there anything more we need to be doing to create the change we want to see in the world, do you think?
You need some really practical examples about where this has worked, and you know, we could talk about how ideas take off and the leaders that you need, but ultimately it's the examples that bring it to any concept to life.
And examples with real stories attached. Alex, it's been fascinating as always to talk to you, and I really appreciate that.